So I'm here with Christian Howes, who has done a fantastic presentation this morning for the ESTA conference here in Cardiff. So Christian, you were talking, you're basically working with improvisation, but in, I think, probably a different way than anybody here had experienced before. How did you get into all that?
So when I was 15 or 16, I had been playing classical violin for a long time, but some of my friends were playing in rock bands, and I was jealous of them because they were so creative and they were playing music in a different way. I joined the rock band, and I was immediately confronted by how much I didn't know, and I thought I was like the expert in the room, but my friends had only had like one or two lessons. So that was my first encounter with like a different community of musicians, and coming to face with my own vulnerability around music, just knowledge gaps, skill gaps, perspective gaps. I explored that in the rock band, playing bass and guitar, and eventually with my violin. And later I went on to join other communities, whether it was playing in blues, jazz, Latin music, and other things.
Yeah.
So for a long time I was identified as a jazz violinist, although I was really eclectic. And over time I realized that I wanted to teach, and I saw a need for classical string players to overcome the same deficits and fears that I had experienced. And I think that there's a unique place to fill this hole, because what we find in the culture of music education, in my opinion, is we find three distinct enclaves, and one is classical music education, another is the academized jazz education, and then there's what I would call participatory cultural traditions, which there are many of. The thing is that there are strengths that can be gained from each of these. So actually jazz is in some ways kind of shutting itself off by explicitly dictating that musicians only come on their terms. And not all jazz educators are that way, and it's becoming more open. But for classical musicians, there's many classical musicians who want to develop more functionalities and skills and knowledge of music, but they don't want to do it in one specific way. They don't want to do it with the trappings that come with jazz, or maybe the trappings that come with fiddle music, or the trappings that come with this. So I started to try to identify and teach the fundamental skills that I believe could apply universally across many of these stylistic and different communities, so that classical musicians could have a bridge to be more creative.
Yeah, because I think that it's always trying to find that way in. I think for classical music, there's a fear, isn't there, of I can't do that. And I think things have improved. I think in the conservatoire culture, in that there's a broader, more diverse curriculum now. But you've still got that basic fear. If you're taught, and you can play all your Bach and your Paganini and whatever, but then you get put in a rock band or with a jazz group, and it could be scary. But I think the way I saw from your session this morning, the way you're approaching it is so basic in the nicest, the best possible way, and fundamental in the best possible way. I think that's great, isn't it? Because you can't. Nobody in that room this morning was scared, I don't think, after about the first 30 seconds. Do you think? Hopefully. Is that your experience? Is that your experience of when you get groups like that together?
Yeah, I mean, so with the particular presentation I did today, which is around structured, non-tonal improvisation, I specifically design it so that people who have not improvised before can immediately do it in a way that feels comfortable. The way I do that is by removing choices. So, for example, if I were to say to you, hey, you can either play the note D or the note A. Pick one and then play either of them. Okay? Go. That doesn't feel threatening, because it's like, I know how to play a D, I know how to play an A. So it's by really removing choices, limiting those choices, number one. Number two, by making sure that I'm giving you a task that you're fully capable of understanding and executing in this moment. It's very different than if I said, hey, improvise over this folk song. Because if you don't fully understand the folk song, and we might be tempted to think we do when we don't, then that's going to be a context where you experience failure. What happens a lot of times with people who try to improvise is that they have limited success with improvisation in one context. in one day, but then the next day they go and they don't, and then they're just thrown off, and they're like, wait, what's going on here? So the ability to recognize the apples and oranges of different musical contexts and identify, I can succeed in this creative environment, and this with this material, maybe not so much with this over here, so I'm going to learn that. What I really did today was exploring those things, limiting choices, and also giving context and structure where improvisation will be successful for any really any classical musician, even a totally untrained classical
I thought that was great to start with those rules where you're listening to you're saying you've got to do it with this, and this rule, and then there's virtually nothing that they can do apart from that. You're being, it's very, very controlled, but then you almost immediately you're opening that out, and people just, you can see people's recognition that this is, oh, okay, so from only being able to do this with no real creative choice, suddenly I'm getting these creative choices. Do you think that use of call them rules, adding and taking away rules, is that that's a pretty fundamental thing to, because you're sort of, by limiting choice, you're actually funding the creativity, aren't you?
Yeah, an example would be if you were taking like a writing class, let's say in school, the teacher's not going to just say write something. They're going to say, write something, it needs to be one page, and it's due tomorrow, and it should be autobiographical, and it needs to have these things, So we're creative within a box, within a structure. And like the example you gave earlier today, where I'm like, okay, you have to play this rhythm, and you can play either a D or an A. Go. It's very structured. It's hard to fail at that because it feels like a task that we can do right or wrong, and like we know how to do tasks. Then gradually, we branch that out. But I would say that the way to practice creativity is to go through numerous repetitions within a structure like this. And maybe it wouldn't be that exact example, but I think a lot of jazz musicians, they'll work with a very small amount of material with a lot of structural variations. So I might say like, well, I'm literally going to play quarter notes over and over and over again, but I'm going to do it for 5 minutes. And through the course of 5 minutes, you start to really expand more and more and more. And then you say, well, I'm going to do it with eighth notes, and I'm going to do it with eighth notes and rests. And we might do it in a context that's comfortable if we're untrained, in the sense of, well, I'm going to do it in the key of D major. But once we learn like a chord progression or some harmonic or rhythmic information, then we might do that over a song, where we know we have one bar of G minor, and then a bar of D7, and then a bar of F sharp diminished, and then a bar of C minor, and then we can start to do it over that. But one of the critical mistakes that so many of us do is that we try to improvise over that context, over that chord progression, when we haven't really learned it yet. We want to give ourselves more grace and more time to learn it, much in the same way that I'm sure that many of the teachers in ESTA, if I were to come to you and say, I tried to teach a 5-year-old yesterday and I just failed epically, what's wrong with me? They would say, there's nothing wrong with you, you just have to learn. Yeah. There's specific things about teaching 5-year-olds. Yeah. And but we kind of beat ourselves up in the same way when we say, why can't I do it? Why can't I improvise a perfect solo over this song? No, there's just things you need to learn.
Yeah, that was the sort of the other thing that I thought was fascinating, what you were trying to cover, was that thing about positivity, about actually looking for the best in what you can do, which is a thing that, I think it is, again, all that sort of thing is much more in the forefront these days, but it's so important because we tend to beat ourselves up if we don't think we can do something. And I think you were trying to just stamp on that straight away, which is great.
You're enough just where you are right now.
Yeah.
And if you're in a yoga class, and the teacher will say that about your body, we're standing in our body, and my body is, I can notice things about my body, but also it's important to say, my body is enough. It's everything it needs to be, it's whatever, powerful and beautiful and whatever. And I think we can see our sound and our musicality in the same way, analogous to how we see our body in a yoga class, to really say, wherever I am right now, it's enough. I'm still powerful, intelligent, soulful, beautiful, and musical. And it might look different than somebody else. If I'm in a yoga class, there's some woman next to me and she's tied in pretzels and she's doing all these things that I can't do. But it doesn't make her better than me. It doesn't make me unworthy.
Yeah.
I think especially for teachers, it's really important for teachers to acknowledge themselves for their own musicality and their ability, and not to be comparing themselves to whoever, some virtuoso out there.
Yeah, the whole competitive element is a very negative thing, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah. It's and I will say that as even as a award-winning jazz violinist, that I felt a lot of insecurity for many years. It's only been the last few that I've released a lot of that. There's not a correlation between ability and insecurity. The most virtuosic people can really beat themselves up, right?
Yeah.
So why can't we all see our practice as musicians and as teachers as a vehicle to become better friends to ourselves and prioritize the joy of making music for us? It's for us. Of course it's for an audience too, but it needs to be for us before we can give anything to anybody else.
And one of my feelings on these things is that actually for you to have the joy in your own playing and you communicate that to your listener, that is its own good end result anyway.
Totally.
So great. Well, Christian, absolutely fantastic talking to you, and great hearing your improv ideas this morning. I'm buzzing with loads of ideas, which is great. So thank you very much for coming and talking to us. And look up Christian online. Is there a quick, easy website?
Christian Howes, HOWES.com. You can also find me on YouTube, where I have hundreds of free play-along videos where you can just push play and play along with me.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Steve.
Go and look at those, and thank you very much.
Yeah, appreciate you.